the House passes Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill. But what's in it, and how much of it actually goes to COVID relief? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Subscribe to this channel and click the notification bell on so you can be the first to watch our new episodes every week. On Saturday, the U.S. House of Representatives approved President Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion pandemic rescue plan. It barely passed, 219 to 212. Every Republican voted against it, and so did a couple of Democrats. So, it's bipartisan. That is, opposition to the bill is bipartisan. Now it goes to the Senate. The Senate will take some things out of the House bill and then add in its own amendments. And then the House will have to vote on it again in 2 weeks. So it started with President Biden, and now the two houses of Congress are having their way with it. I guess Schoolhouse Rock skipped a few steps when they talked about how a bill becomes a law. The current version of the stimulus bill would directly pay $1,400 per person who earns up to $75,000. And it would increase unemployment benefits from $300 a week to $400 a week and extend them until the end of August. It also has new increases in tax credits for families with children and low-income workers without children. It also gives $10 billion for pandemic supplies, $25 billion for rental assistance, another $25 billion in grants for restaurants and bars, $7.5 billion to the CDC for vaccine distribution, $46 billion for COVID testing and tracing, and $4.5 billion to help families with home heating and cooling costs. But wait, there's more. $30 billion for transportation, $128 billion in grants to state educational agencies, $39 billion in grants to higher education, and a whole lot more spending on other programs. So it's no surprise that every Republican opposed the bill. And as I said, 2 Democrats opposed it as well. Those Democrats are Representatives Kurt Schrader and Jared Golden. Kurt Schrader criticized new spending for programs seen as unrelated to the pandemic or unnecessary for higher income families. Jared Golden likewise says the bill addresses urgent needs and then buries them under a mountain of unnecessary and untimely spending. Hey, what's untimely about spending $30 billion on transportation? I just hope some of that goes to feeding the rats in the New York subway. Look, if we don't feed them, they're going to come for us. Now, in reviewing the $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill, Representative Golden found that less than 20% of it actually addresses COVID relief. Is that true? Is most of the coronavirus relief package unrelated to the pandemic itself? I'll get to that question later. The Democratic leadership wants Biden's COVID plan to become law by March 14th. March 14th, by the way, is when current jobless benefits that were extended in the last stimulus bill expire. To do that, they got everybody united. And by united, I mean united in being unsatisfied about key elements of the bill, even among Democrats. I'll tell you how after the break. Welcome back. If you're a progressive who wants to see the coronavirus relief bill passed with a $15 minimum wage, then you're going to be disappointed. The Senate parliamentarian, Elizabeth McDonough, ruled that a $15 minimum wage hike can't be in the coronavirus bill. That's because Congress is trying to use a shortcut budget process to pass the bill with simple majorities. Senate Democrats are going to pass the bill using a budget reconciliation process. That means they only need a simple majority, 51 votes, to pass the bill. But the parliamentarian says the minimum wage hike can't be included because it's not directly related to government spending or taxes, which are the only things that can be passed using that budget process. We've talked about the parliamentarian in a previous video. A number of Democrats want Vice President Harris to overrule the parliamentarian. And a group of left-wing organizations organized a rally outside the White House on Friday to pressure Harris to do so. But guess what? Harris said no, she won't overrule her. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said President Joe Biden is disappointed by the parliamentarian's decision, but respects the process. According to The Hill, this is because Biden is a staunch institutionalist who is hesitant to change the Senate's rules. Or maybe he just can't remember what the Senate rules are, because it's been a long time since he was a senator. That's all I'm saying. But Representative Ilhan Omar has a better idea. If you don't like the parliamentarian, get rid of that position altogether. Get rid of all the rules, actually. She said, what's a Democratic majority if we can't pass our priority bills? This kind of strategic thinking definitely would never come back to bite Democrats later when Republicans have a majority. And that brings us to the next point. Some people are trying to use the levers of government to tweak the bill. And you do that by adding amendments, not by actually pulling levers. You can find some real gems on Shutterstock. For example, Democratic Senators Bernie Sanders and Ron Wyden had proposed that instead of an official $15 minimum wage, they can add an amendment to the bill that would simply punish big corporations that pay workers less than $15 an hour. It would levy a 5% penalty on a big corporation's total payroll if they don't comply. But it turns out that might not be such a good idea. Economists and tax experts have said that the tax could be easily avoided and difficult to implement, with large corporations able to reclassify workers as contractors to avoid potential penalties. Wait, you're saying large corporations would use loopholes to avoid paying taxes? I'm shocked. So the Democrats backed down from that idea. And in all likelihood, it's not politically feasible for Democrats to get the $15 minimum wage in the relief package. But not to worry, because as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says, it is inevitable to all of us that the $15 minimum wage will be achieved. Yeah, someday, when the price of a Big Mac is $42, then Congress will finally pass the $15 minimum wage. So, how will the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package affect everyday Americans and businesses? I'll get to that after the break. Welcome back. How will the COVID relief package affect everyday Americans? Will it actually help deal with coronavirus challenges? Well, there are some things that will help average Americans get more money, like the direct $1,400 stimulus check, also the unemployment benefits and tax credits. And there are also tens of billions of dollars going directly to coronavirus-related things, like testing and tracing, and vaccine distribution. But there's also a lot in the bill that doesn't directly deal with coronavirus relief, or that takes years to actually kick in. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy says the bill takes care of Democrats' political allies while it fails to deliver for American families. The Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, accuses the bill of treating coronavirus as an afterthought because public health represents less than 10% of spending in the package. Another controversial item is the money going to education. The Congressional Budget Office reveals only about a third of the education funds would be spent in the next year and a half. And that would be throwing money at something that already had money thrown at it. Because it turns out, more than $50 billion in education relief money from last year still hasn't been spent. According to the Centers for Disease Control, reopening schools should cost around $23 billion. So with the 50+ billion already available from Trump's federal emergency funds from last year, state education agencies should have more than enough funds to safely reopen, plus a few billion extra left over for pet projects, like feeding the New York subway rats. Thank you. Libertarian news magazine Reason.com says it doesn't make sense that the only way for schools to reopen would be to authorize more money, especially when most of it wouldn't roll out for years. After all, just $6 billion would be spent in the 2021 fiscal year. Another $32 billion would be spent in 2022, and the rest by 2028. Slate magazine, however, argues that maybe the relief plan is too big, but the Republican alternative is too small. Several Republican senators, led by Senator Susan Collins, had offered an alternative bill that cost only $618 billion, less than a third of the current bill. The Republican bill included $160 billion for coronavirus-related public health initiatives, like testing, protective equipment, and a national vaccine program, and $40 billion in small business loans. But it only gave stimulus checks of up to $1,000 and $300 in unemployment benefits, which would expire in June. The biggest difference between the two bills was that the Republican version didn't offer any money to state and local governments, because conservatives argue that Biden's stimulus, including the money for state and local governments, will not actually help the economy. The National Review says Biden's proposal would do little to improve the economy, since more than 1/3 of the stimulus won't be spent until 2022 or later. State and local governments would be getting $370 billion under Joe Biden's stimulus bill, but much of it will be unused until 2023. But despite the criticism, the Senate will pass a version of Biden's stimulus bill probably this week. There may be some minor changes, adding or subtracting a few $billion here or there. I say, if we're already at $1.9 trillion of spending, why not just add another $100 billion and make it an even $2 trillion? That $100 billion would of course go to feeding the subway rats. So, are you looking forward to the $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief bill passing through the Senate? Leave your comments below. And remember, America Uncovered is supported mainly by viewers. So visit patreon.com/America Uncovered. Contribute $1 or more per episode. We rely on your support to help us keep making great episodes. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.